At one point or another, we've all heard some new invention or discovery be joyously touted as the greatest thing since sliced bread. And if you've ever wondered how a pre-carved baking product became the measuring stick for all subsequent human advances, then you're in the right place. Because today we're taking a look at the crazy history of sliced bread. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other staples we take for granted you'd like to hear about. Okay, get ready, 'cause here we go. Bread is one of the oldest prepared foods by humans in human history, right up there with woolly mammoth burgers and that can of green beans that's been sitting in the back of your pantry since you moved in. There is at least some evidence to suggest bread making might have begun as far back as 30,000 years ago, when people in Europe and Australia baked starch from plant roots by spreading it on a flat rock and sticking it in a fire. But the oldest confirmed bread sighting dates back to Jordan, some 14,500 years ago. Scientists have found evidence of flatbread made from wild wheat and barley, mixed with plant roots and water, as if from a prehistoric Panera. This flatbread is believed to have tasted somewhat like a modern multigrain wrap and used to hold roasted meat. However, unlike the honey-smoked turkey and mortadella we have today, the ancient Jordanians most likely ate roasted gazelle. Try getting that at Subway. Fast forward another 4,000 years. Agriculture was spreading, and flatbread had become an important part of a balanced breakfast, along with gazelle steak, of course. From there, it only took another 4,000 years before someone started baking leavened bread, that someone being a baker in Sumeria. 3,000 years after that, much like the world did during COVID, the Sumerians shared their sourdough starter with their neighbors in Egypt. Ever the tinkerers, the Egyptians then refined the bread-making process the same way they made the pyramids, with help from aliens. Okay, we're not totally sure about that last part, but they did add yeast to the flour, allowing the dough to be molded into different shapes before baking. We'd like to think some ancient Egyptian bakers used this newfound power to create bread obelisks and bread sphinxes. But mostly it seems like they made things like triangles, cones, and for the first time in history, loaves. Now that the human race had loaves of bread, we needed something to do with them. Enter the sandwich. While the idea of using bread as a utensil or accompaniment for food has been around since, well, bread, the origins of what we traditionally consider a sandwich began in Europe around the Middle Ages. Trenchers, which were thick slices of coarse, stale bread, were essentially used as plates. After a meal, the trencher, now soaked with the delicious remnants of the food that sat upon it, was treated as scraps and fed to dogs or beggars, who were more or less considered interchangeable back then. Later, in the 1600s, the Dutch would take thin slices of beef and combine them with bread and butter, thus creating what we now know as the open-faced sandwich. All of that innovation notwithstanding, the concept of using a second slice of bread wasn't popularized until the next century. Behold, the modern sandwich. Initially a food for gamblers, the sandwich by name was popularized by John Montagu, the 4th Earl of Sandwich. Good thing they used his title instead of his last name. Imagine ordering a tuna salad Montagu for lunch. Anyway, Montagu would have his valet bring him roast beef between 2 pieces of toasted bread while playing cribbage in what was essentially an 18th century casino. The protective layer of bread allowed him to live the dream of eating and gambling at the same time without getting his cards greasy, and more importantly, without needing a fork, because that would require a third hand. This meal exploded in popularity around London, and with it, his name. With the rise of the industrial age in the 19th century, the need for a quick and cheap meal on the go became essential. And since Hot Pockets hadn't been invented yet, by 1850 there were more than 70 street vendors selling ham sandwiches on the streets of London. By the early 20th century, the sandwich was also a staple of the American diet. But all those sandwiches meant millions of wrists across the globe growing weary from the constant back and forth motion needed to cut a loaf into slices. The tendons of the world needed a hero, and they got one. His name was Otto Rohwedder. Born in Iowa in 1880, Otto was originally a jeweler's apprentice. He changed fields in 1900, earning himself a degree in optics, but soon returned to his first love, buying 3 jewelry stores in Missouri. As part of his jeweling, Otto would work with the complicated machinery of watches which he repaired in his shops. It was through this mechanical know-how that he got an idea that would revolutionize baking forever: a bread slicing machine. So convinced of the power of his idea, Otto sold his jewelry stores to fund the development of his miracle machine. And things seemed to be going well until 1917, when a fire destroyed the factory where his machine was being manufactured. As if that wasn't bad enough, Otto also kept his prototype and blueprints at the factory, and since the photocopier wouldn't be invented for another 2 decades, he found himself back at square one. Long story short, it took him several years to recoup his losses and find financing for another prototype. In the interim, he changed careers to work a more stable job that couldn't possibly end in disaster: 1920s era investment banker. He also kept working on the machine, and after doing extensive research, determined the perfect thickness for each slice would be slightly less than ½ an inch. We're not entirely sure how he reached that conclusion, but we've also never heard any complaints about the thickness of sliced bread, so good on you, Otto. Anyway, he finally caught a break and got out of the securities game before the stock market crashed, and in 1927, he successfully created a machine that not only sliced bread, but also wrapped it. He then patented his invention and sold it to the Chillicothe Baking Company in Chillicothe, Missouri. With no bread slicers union to object, Otto's product, called clean-made sliced bread, quickly became a sensation. In July of 1928, the Chillicothe Constitution Tribute noted that a housewife could expect a thrill of pleasure when she saw the even, uniform slices the machine created. And here we thought the right to vote was the biggest victory women got in the 1920s. Otto's second machine was purchased by a St. Louis baker named Gustav Poppendick, who saw an opportunity for improvement. Bakers were worried a sliced loaf would dry out too quickly, so Gustav experimented with methods to keep the bread tightly bound to retain moisture. First he tried rubber bands, and then metal pins. But a mouthful of metal and rubber was the exclusive territory of orthodontists, so Gustav finally just put the bread into a cardboard tray, thus aligning the slices so that they could be wrapped tightly. This innovation caused bread sales in St. Louis to rise by 80%, pun not intended. The bread slicer wasn't the only device that Otto's genius blew up, figuratively speaking. Inventor Charlie Strite first patented his pop-up toaster in 1921, but the machine had mostly sat unsold on shelves since 1926. Now, with Otto's standard slice widths, the device made sense, as it would now rarely jam, pun completely intended this time. In addition to standardized slices, Otto's creation also gave us one of the most famous idioms in the English language: the greatest invention since sliced bread. You see, when first released, clean-made sliced bread was advertised as the greatest forward step in the baking industry since bread was wrapped. Later, in 1933, Walsh Baking Company's advertisement for their Golden Toast Thick and Thin product claimed theirs was the first improvement since sliced bread. Throughout the 1930s, there were a slew of advertisements with some version of this claim. All of these likely echoed the original ad, maintaining a long-standing advertising tradition of doing the same thing your competitor does. Anyhow, the sinuous history of sliced bread took yet another turn in 1930, when the Continental Baking Company introduced Wonderbread nationwide. Now synonymous with pre-made sliced bread, Wonderbread first appeared in stores in 1921, then made by the Taggart Baking Company. The bread got its name from Taggart VP Bertram H. Wonderbread. No, that's a joke. His name was Elmer Klein, and apparently he was filled with a sense of wonder after watching a hot air balloon race. This kaleidoscopic astonishment resulted in the iconic red, yellow, and blue balloons featured on Wonderbread's packaging. Continental bought Taggart in 1925 and adopted the sliced bread technique soon after. Despite Gustav Poppendick's best efforts, the apprehension over dried-out loaves still permeated the minds of consumers nationwide. But in true human fashion, convenience won out over apprehension. and soon Wonderbread became a nationwide staple. As bright and colorful as sliced bread's future seemed, dark times were on the horizon. As sliced bread's golden age ended, so did worldwide peace. Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 eventually brought the entire world into war. And thanks to an unusual decision by the United States government, sliced bread went from a common household item to a luxury. To say that World War II posed a number of challenges is maybe the greatest understatement in the history of understatements. One such difficulty was rationing. Meat, sugar, gasoline, metals, and other materials were produced in lower numbers in order to go to the war effort. But even at the time, the bread ban seemed weird. Said ban was enacted in 1943 by Secretary of Agriculture Claude Wickard. The explanation? A pre-sliced loaf used more packaging than an unsliced one. Yep, that's it. The prohibition was meant to conserve paper and also to counteract a rise in the price of bread after another wartime bureaucracy, the Office of Price Administration, authorized a 10% increase in the price of flour. Price fixing that favored the consumer. What a time to be alive. Nevertheless, sliced bread found an unlikely ally in New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, who said in a radio address that bakeries already using bread slicing machines should be allowed to continue to use them. Perhaps uncoincidentally, 2 days later, a letter from a distressed housewife appeared in the New York Times, asserting how important sliced bread was to the morale and saneness of a household, as she had to cut 22 slices by hand every day. Hardly the future Otto Rohwedder envisioned. The ban was, of course, extremely unpopular. Stories of irregularly cut toast being thrown away after burning in the toaster, and bakers' jobs being harder due to their pre-existing slicing and wrapping machines were rampant. Even Mayor LaGuardia got in on the action, arguing that having to cut your own bread, as he'd watched his wife struggle to do, would only increase demand for new knives at a time when there was a steel shortage. The ban rage even got as far as Congress, where Indiana Congressman Forrest Harness called it a dictatorial abuse of power. Still, the Great Bread Battle of New York raged on. 2 days after that letter, the New York area supervisor of the FDA warned bakeries, delis, and other stores to stop slicing their own bread, as it provided unfair competition to larger bakeries, and that the state was prepared to step in if necessary. Not wanting open warfare between bread armies on the streets of our cities, the ban was rescinded in early March of that same year. While public outcry is, for the most part, credited as the reason the feds backed down, the official line was that the paper savings were not as much as the government expected, and that the U.S. had enough wax paper to both wrap bread and fight Nazis. With Americans' love of convenience having defeated the forces of government overreach, and the war ending, sliced bread was once again set to thrive. But not without more governmental interference. The Great Depression and World War II had brought about a period of poor nutrition, and foods like white bread provided little nutritional value at the time. In an effort to combat this, the FDA began what became known as the flour hearings, as the Surgeon General encouraged Wonderbread and other brands to fortify their products by adding in vitamins that were removed during the wheat bleaching process. In the end, the wording famously used was enriched, rather than restored, so as to hide the vitamin stripping process from consumers. Naturally, this new mandate was advertised by bread manufacturers as a feature, not a bug, and Wonderbread claimed that their product was a health food by showcasing this newly added nutrition. Over the ensuing decades, the pushback against industrialized foods, starting with the hippies of the 1960s, changed pre-sliced white bread from being a staple of the middle class to one of the working people. That's a fight that still rages today, albeit with less LSD and fewer paisley shirts. And even Wonderbread wasn't immune. In 2012, the product quietly left grocery store shelves when then-owner Hostess filed for bankruptcy. By that time, consumers had gotten wise to what enriched actually meant, and profits suffered. Still, the venerable brand couldn't be defeated. It was purchased by Flour Foods, who reintroduced Wonderbread in its original branded packaging, capitalizing on the warm, fuzzy nostalgia associated with it, and assuring Bertram H. Wonderbread's legacy would live on. Despite a more health-conscious public, pre-sliced bread is still as available as ever. It comes in dozens of varieties, including wheat, sourdough, potato, and oatmeal. There's even a type made with 24 different grains, which seems super impressive, at least until someone invents a 25th grain. Not limited to flavors, sliced bread also comes in a variety of thicknesses around the world. In preferences found exclusively in the United Kingdom and in dating apps, options include extra thick, thick, medium, or thin. In Japan, bread is sold by the number of slices, usually 4 or 6, and whole-cut loaves are rarely seen. And true to its name, double-thick Texas toast is sold all over the US and Canada. Ironically, it is this enduring popularity that may disprove that legendary expression: there has yet to be a greater invention since sliced bread. So what do you think? Is sliced bread the pinnacle of human achievement? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Weird History Food.